In a hidden shed, lit only by a wall of glowing monitors, Princess Bubblegum watches her candy citizens go about their days, and none of them know they are being seen, while somewhere out in the kingdom, Cinnamon Bun reaches up and quietly pulls a tiny camera out of his own face. The ruler everyone trusts has been watching all of them. Tonight, I want to make a case, gently, that Princess Bubblegum is morally wrong, and I want to argue it honestly, holding up the kindest reading of her too. So let yourself get heavy and still dim the light right down, and if a slow argument whispered in the dark is the kind of thing that walks you toward sleep, a subscribe helps me keep making them. None of this is settled fact. It is one reading, offered softly the way you would turn an idea over with a friend, at 2 in the morning. Welcome to Pine Hat. Let's start where her good intentions begin. Let me start where I think the discomfort starts, in a little shed full of screens that no one in the Candy Kingdom knew was there. Princess Bubblegum is standing in front of a wall of monitors, and each one is a window into someone's life. Her citizens, the people she rules and loves, going about their days, being watched, none of them told. And then the detail that turns my stomach a little every time. One of the cameras is inside Cinnamon Bun's face. He reaches up and pulls it out of himself, and he never knew it was there either. So here's the question I want to sit with for the next while. Is she still morally wrong if she's genuinely good, genuinely loving, almost always right? And does being good at it make it better or worse? Read this way, the surveillance room is the perfect place to begin because it makes you feel the wrongness in your gut before anyone argues anything. The discomfort is the thesis in miniature. Now let me be honest, from the first minute, calling her morally wrong is a reading I'm going to build and test, not a fact the show declares. Some viewers see everything she does as simple protection, and I'm going to take that seriously, not knock it down cheaply. This is one argument, and the defense gets its full day in court, because the easy charges come first, and they're worse than the cameras. So let me put the easy part of the case on the table first. The part you can practically feel the moment you notice it. Because almost everyone who watches closely arrives here on their own. You don't need a degree in anything. You don't need a theory. You just need to have seen a handful of episodes and let them sit. And then one quiet night the pieces drift together and you think, oh, she runs a surveillance state. That's the casual fan's half-formed suspicion, the one a lot of people carry around without ever quite saying out loud. And the strange thing is that it's correct. It's not a stretch. It's not a deep cut. It's right there on the surface if you're willing to look at it plainly. And the cleanest piece of evidence is the one I started with, so let me actually stay inside it this time, because it deserves more than a glance. In the episode called The Cooler, which came out in December of 2014, late in the show's run, we find out that Princess Bubblegum keeps a secret room. Not a lab, not a workshop where she's tinkering with something sweet and harmless. A monitoring room. A wall of screens glowing in the dark, and every screen is somebody citizens of the Candy Kingdom. The very people she governs. The very people she would tell you she loves, all of them caught on camera, going about ordinary little lives, eating, talking, wandering around, doing the small private nothing that makes up most of a person's day. And not one of them has been told. That's the part that lands. The watching itself is one thing, but the watching without consent, the watching of people who believe they're alone, who believe they're free, that's the thing that has a particular cold weight to it. And then the detail I keep circling back to, the one I genuinely can't shake. One of those cameras isn't mounted on a wall or hidden in a lamp. It's in his face. He's been walking around this sweet, slow, gentle character who would never hurt anybody, and the whole time there's been a lens looking out of him, sending pictures back to her room of screens, and he had no idea. When he pulls it out of himself, there's something almost unbearable in how casual it is, because for him, it's a discovery, but for her, it was just policy. Just one more node in the network. He was, without his knowledge, a piece of her surveillance equipment, a person turned into a device. Honestly, sit with that one for a second, because the show breezes past it the way it breezes past a lot of its darkest material, and I think the breeziness is the point. And really stay with Cinnamon Bun specifically, because of all the citizens she could have used, he's the one that aches. He's not a clever character. He's not the type to suspect anyone of anything. He's gentle and a little simple and trusting in the way that makes you protective of him. The kind of soul who takes the world at face value because it would never occur to him to do otherwise. And she looked at exactly that, at his openness, at the very trust that should have made him off limits, and she made it useful. She turned the most guileless person in the kingdom into a lens. There's a small, sad irony buried in there that I don't think is an accident. The ones who'd never imagine being watched are the easiest ones to watch. He never doubted her. That's precisely why he made such a good camera. Here's the reading I want to put on it, and I want to be careful to call it a reading, because this is where interpretation starts, and I don't want to smuggle it in as fact. The show does not frame this room the way a different show would. There's no sinister music swelling, no shot of Bubblegum cackling over her monitors, no moment where she leans back and reveals herself as a villain who's been fooling us all along. It's not played as cartoonish evil. Read this way, it's played as ordinary, as statecraft, as a thing a reasonable, responsible ruler does because she's responsible, because she cares, because somebody has to keep an eye on things. And that, to me, is exactly what should unsettle us. The most disturbing version of surveillance isn't the one performed by an obvious monster. It's the one performed by someone good, someone who sleeps fine at night, someone who would be honestly puzzled that you find it sinister at all. The normalcy is the horror. What this suggests is that, in her mind, there was never a line to cross, because watching everyone was simply the sensible thing, and sensible things don't feel like crimes from the inside. And before you think this is one isolated episode, one weird late series reveal we can wave away, it isn't. The groundwork goes back further. Back in season 5, well before the Cooler ever spelled it out, she had already installed surveillance cameras throughout the Candy Kingdom and implanted tracking chips in her citizens. Tracking chips in people, so that the room of monitors we eventually see isn't some sudden new paranoia. It's the visible tip of an apparatus she'd been building for a while, quietly in the background, while the kingdom carried on thinking of her as their bright, brilliant, beloved princess. The cameras watch where you are, the chips know where you go. Put those two together and you don't have a worried leader keeping a casual eye out. You have an architecture, a system with intent behind it. And I want you to picture the texture of that, because I think the picture matters more than the word architecture does. Imagine the Candy Kingdom the way it's usually drawn for us. All those soft pastel hills and gumdrop houses and little round candy people bobbing down the streets. The whole place lit up like a birthday. It's one of the warmest looking places in all of cartoons. And then imagine threading through all of that warmth, invisibly, a layer of lenses and signals. Every cheerful little citizen carrying a quiet point on a map, every sunny afternoon logged somewhere by someone none of them ever see. There's a particular kind of melancholy in that image when you let yourself feel it, the gap between how soft the place looks and how watched it actually is. The brightness doesn't go away when you learn about the chips. It just stops being innocent. And maybe that's the saddest version of it, that the kingdom never gets to choose between safety and the cameras, because the cameras arrived without the kingdom ever being asked. Although, and I want to be fair here, because being fair is the whole job, let me flag what we actually know versus what we infer. The full extent of this infrastructure is never really mapped out in the show. Nobody hands us a blueprint. We see a room, we see some chips, we hear about cameras, and then our own minds do the rest, filling in the scope, imagining the reach, picturing a kingdom blanketed in eyes. The honest version is that canon shows us pieces and we assemble the monster. That doesn't make the pieces innocent. A room full of screens and chips and citizens is damning enough on its own. But I'd be doing exactly the thing I criticized her for, deciding the verdict before the evidence, if I pretended the show draws the map for us. It doesn't. We draw it. Just keep that in your pocket as we go, because it matters later. Now, let me go backward in time, all the way to the first season. Because the unease didn't start with cameras. It started earlier, and quieter, and in some ways nastier. There's an episode from early on called What Have You Done? And in it, Princess Bubblegum gives Finn and Jake an order. She wants them to capture the Ice King. Not just capture him though, she wants them to torture him. And here's the part that should stop you. She refuses to tell them why. They ask. Of course they ask. And she won't say, she just expects it done. Let me slow all the way down here, because I think this little episode does more damage to the benevolent picture than the entire surveillance room does. And almost nobody talks about it that way. Think about what's actually being asked. Two heroes, two genuinely good kids in their way, are being told by the ruler they trust to inflict pain on a living creature. And when they want to know the reason, the most basic reason a decent person would ask for, the answer is silence. You don't get to know. Just do it. And read this way that silence is the tell. That's the whole authoritarian instinct in one small refusal. Because the deepest assumption underneath it, the thing the moment reveals about how she understands power, is that the people carrying out her orders are not owed an explanation. The governed don't get reasons. They get instructions. A leader who believed she answered to her people would have explained herself, would have felt she had to. She doesn't feel that. The not explaining isn't an oversight. It's a worldview, and I'd argue the worldview is more frightening than any single thing she does with it. And I'll be honest, the show is gentle enough that you can almost let it slide. It moves on. The plot does its plot things, but pull that one scene out and hold it up to the light, and it's chilling. A good ruler asking good people to do a cruel thing and treating their need to understand as an irrelevance. That's not a glitch in the benevolent dictator. That is the benevolent dictator. Then there are the bones. Go back even further to one of the very earliest episodes, the one with Ricardio, the little heart guy who climbs out of the Ice King and tries to charm his way close to the princess. It's a goofy episode on its face, it really is, full of slapstick and a talking heart waltzing around. But somewhere in the Candy Castle, just for a moment, the show lets you glimpse something it doesn't explain. Hidden chambers. And in them, skeletons, bones, tucked away inside the walls of this bright pink palace, shown to you for barely a beat and never accounted for. Now I want to be precise about what I think those skeletons are doing, because it would be cheap to wave them around as proof of murders we never see. That's not the reading I'd defend. There's no episode where we learn who they were or how they died, and I'm not going to invent one. What this suggests to me is something subtler, and honestly more effective. The bones aren't evidence of a specific crime. They're the show seeding a feeling. They're a quiet signal, dropped early, almost subliminally, that this castle has rooms we are not allowed into. That underneath the candy and the warmth and the lovely pink towers, there are locked doors, and behind some of them are things that were never meant to be seen. Read that way, the skeletons work on you before you can articulate why. You don't consciously think, she's a killer. You just come away with a faint sense that the brightness might be a surface, and that the surface has a basement. And the show planted that in season 1, long before it ever showed you the room of screens. It knew where it was going, it was just letting you feel it first. So that's a little uneasy aside I'll let myself have. The thing that gets me about Adventure Time is how often it hides the dark stuff in the corner of a silly frame, so you absorb it without deciding to. Anyway, back to building the case. Because eventually the show stops hinting and lets a character say the quiet thing out loud. Much later, in the 8th season, there's an episode called High Strangeness, and in it, a group called the Veritas Brigade openly accuses Princess Bubblegum of running a fascist dictatorship. They say it. Plainly, the word is spoken inside the show itself by characters within the story pointed straight at the princess. After seasons of glimpses and hidden rooms and unexplained orders, somebody finally stands up and names it. And this is the moment where I have to stop and be more honest than the prosecution would like me to be, because if I just played that clip and moved on, I'd be cheating you. Here's the complication, and it's a real one. The show does not present the Veritas Brigade as heroes who've seen the truth. It frames them as conspiracy theorists, as cranks, as exactly the kind of people who'd accuse a beloved leader of fascism over breakfast and then go looking for lizard people in the afternoon. So the most damning word in the whole series, the word fascist, is deliberately placed in the mouths of characters the narrative treats as unreliable. The story practically nudges you to roll your eyes at them. But, and here's the knot, their accusation isn't wrong. That's the thing. Her hidden activities are real. The surveillance room is real. The chips are real. The unexplained order to torture is real. The cranks happen to be right. And so what looks at first like a clean point for the prosecution, see, even the show says she's a fascist, turns into something far more tangled and far more interesting. The truth gets spoken by the people least likely to be believed, which is one of the oldest and most uncomfortable patterns there is. I'm not going to pretend that scene is a slam dunk from my side. It isn't. It's evidence wearing a disguise, and the disguise is part of the evidence. The show lets the accusation be true and ridiculous at the same time. And that doubleness is exactly the kind of thing we have to hold on to, rather than flatten. So let me set down the pile as it stands, and then point at the strangest part of it. A secret room of monitors. A camera inside a friend's face. Cameras through the kingdom and chips in the citizens. An order to torture with no reason given. Bones in the walls of the castle. And an open in-story accusation of dictatorship spoken by people the show treats as fools, but who turn out to be telling the truth. Laid out in a row like that, it's a heavy list. It's the strongest, most familiar stretch of the whole argument. And I've put it early on purpose because I want you to feel the full weight of it before we start complicating it. But here's what I keep snagging on. The thing that turns this from a simple guilty verdict into a genuine puzzle. With all this watching and chipping and ordering and hiding, why does almost nobody resist? You'd think a kingdom under that kind of control would seethe, would whisper, would push back somewhere. And mostly, it doesn't. The citizens go on loving her. They go on trusting her. The candy people, by and large, simply obey, and they do it cheerfully, and that cheerful obedience is its own kind of unsettling. Because a population that adores the one watching them is far easier to watch than a population that fears her. The loopholes. The surveillance enables the order keeps everyone safe, the safety earns their love, and the love makes them stop asking what's behind the locked doors. Round and round. It's stable. It's almost beautiful. It's almost the point. And I don't want to be glib about why they don't resist. Because honestly, when you look at it from inside their lives, it makes a kind of sense, and that's the uncomfortable part. From where Candy Person is standing, she has never given them a reason to be afraid of her. She protects them. She fixes things. When something terrible comes over the hills, and in this world something terrible is always coming over the hills, she's the one who meets it. So why would you resent the eyes when the eyes have only ever kept you alive? Read this way, their obedience isn't stupidity and it isn't cowardice. It's gratitude. They love her because, in the day-to-day, loving her has worked. And that's the quietly devastating thing about a benevolent watcher. She doesn't have to crush dissent, because she's removed the reasons for it before it can form. A frightened people might rebel. A grateful people just hands you the keys and thanks you for holding them. The chains, if you even want to call them, chains are made of relief. And yet, here's the crack in that stable little machine, the thing I want you to carry into everything that follows. This same ruler, this iron hand inside the candy glove, this woman who built a whole apparatus to hold her kingdom in her grip, will one day simply walk away from the throne. Just set it down. The control that looks so total, so permanent, turns out not to be the whole story of her at all, and we'll have to reckon with what that means. But not yet, because before I push the prosecution any further, fairness demands I do the hard thing and build the other side as strongly as I possibly can. And that's exactly where we're going next. But before I push this any further, I have to stop and argue the other side as hard as I possibly can, because if I don't, I'm not being honest with you. And honesty is the whole reason for doing this slowly. It would be so easy to keep stacking up the cameras and the cold orders and let the case build until she looks like a monster in a pink dress. That's not an argument. That's a hit piece. And you came here to drift off to something fair, not to something rigged. So let me turn around completely and defend her, and I want to defend her well enough that it actually stings later. Start with the torture, because that's the heaviest thing I put on the table, and it's the place the defense is strongest. In the episode where the Ice King is strapped down and made to scream, it is genuinely awful to watch. The image sticks, but the show gives a reason, and the reason isn't cruelty. His screams were needed to cure the freezer burn flu that was working its way through her citizens. Read plainly, she wasn't hurting him for sport, or for information, or to break his will, or to make some cold point about who's in charge. She was harvesting the one thing that could save sick people who were counting on her to do something. And the Ice King, if you know his whole sad story, is close to unkillable, and barely holds on to who he is from one scene to the next anyway. The pain is real in the moment, and mostly gone by the next. So here's the Steel Man, stated as cleanly as I can make it. Picture the choice the way she'd have to see it. A flu is moving through the kingdom. Your people are getting sick. And there's exactly one source of the cure in the whole land. And it happens to be a nearly immortal man who barely remembers the last hour. You can leave the cure on the shelf and watch your citizens suffer, or you can take it and end the outbreak. Phrased that way, it stops sounding like a dungeon and starts sounding like triage, the kind of brutal arithmetic that doctors and leaders actually have to do, where every option hurts somebody and the only real question is who. A hard call made by someone who has to carry the consequences either way, and who chose the path that saved the most lives. I genuinely don't know what the gentler answer was supposed to be. Maybe there wasn't one. Now the surveillance, the wall of screens I opened all of this on. Here's the part I really have to be fair about, because it cuts hard against my own thesis. And the fair narrator doesn't get to hide his best counter evidence. She turns it off. By the end of that episode, Bubblegum herself realizes that spying on everyone is wrong, and she's the one who pulls the plug. The monitors go dark. And notice what doesn't happen. Nobody forces her hand. Nobody catches her red-handed and shames her into it. There's no angry mob outside the shed demanding she stop. She just looks at what she built. This quiet room full of other people's private lives. All those little windows into people who trusted her. And something in her turns, and she decides on her own that it's wrong, and she shuts it down. The screens I described glowing in the dark at the very start, the ones that made your stomach turn over, go quiet because of her own conscience, not in spite of it. That's not nothing. That might be the most important thing in this whole defense. A person who polices herself, who corrects herself in private, with no one watching, is a very particular kind of person. And it's not the kind we usually mean by the word tyrant. Hold on to that image, the dark monitors, because I'm going to come back to it more than once before the end of all this. Tonight, I'm only paying off half of it. The cameras come off, and they come off by her own hand. And I have to be just as honest about the episode those screens actually live in, because it does not cut in her favor. In the cooler, the Fire Kingdom's core starts to go cold, its people weakening, and Flame Princess comes to Bubblegum for help. For a moment, it looks like a chance for mercy, but the show pulls the rug out. Bubblegum engineered the whole crisis. She had hidden the camera to spy on the Fire Kingdom, and she hired the Ice King to freeze that core herself, manufacturing the emergency so she could get inside and quietly drain the fire giants, the kingdom's oldest weapons, of their power, leaving Flame Princess weaker if the two of them ever came to blows. She built the disaster she then offered to solve. Flame Princess says it to her face that calling it science or calling it protection does not stop it from making her a bad person. That is the one I can't steelman, so I won't try to. And while I've got you here in the fair-minded part, one quiet, genuine thing, not a sales pitch. If staying up late untangling a cartoon like it actually matters is your kind of comfort, subscribing is a small, free way to keep these slow nights going. And it honestly means a lot. That's it. Back to defending her. Then there's the matter of the secrets, the hidden projects, which I leaned on pretty hard earlier as evidence that she's always cooking up something behind the curtain. Let me give that its fair reading too. In the episode where her quiet activities finally come to light, the strange experiments and the spaceship research turn out to be real, yes, but the show frames them as protective, defensive, preparation against threats, not schemes against her own people. And the characters running around convinced she's up to something sinister are written, at least partly, as paranoid, jumping at shadows, assembling a conspiracy out of a woman who's mostly just doing her homework. So the same facts I used to build suspicion can be read the other way without bending anything. A leader sees dangers on the horizon that ordinary citizens can't, and she gets ready for them in private so she doesn't start a panic. That's not a villain. From this angle, that's a guardian who can't always show her work. Now I have to handle the hardest piece carefully, because it's the one most likely to be unfair if I'm sloppy. And that's the business with Flame Princess as a baby. The story is that Bubblegum advised the Flame King to lock the infant away because her elemental nature was so unstable that extreme emotion could have set her off and, in the worst case, threaten the whole world. And I want to be precise here, because precision is the difference between an argument and a smear. Bubblegum didn't jail a child. She gave a warning, and the imprisonment was the Flame King's act, carried out by him on his own kingdom. His own daughter, framed in-universe, the caution was about catastrophic risk, a planet-level danger, not about wanting a baby to suffer. So I can't fairly file this under she personally imprisoned an infant. The honest version is messier and quieter. She saw a fire that could burn down everything and she said so, and someone else decided what to do with that. The advice was real. The cell was not hers. And it's the same shape as the rest of the defense, isn't it? The thing she's accused of, looked at squarely, keeps coming back framed as protection. The flu cure, the Fire Kingdom rescue, the secret labs aimed at threats, the warning about a child who might end the world. Over and over the show hands her a reason, and the reason is usually that she could see the catastrophe coming when nobody else could. So let me state the real point of the defense, the strongest version, and I want to let it actually land instead of swatting it away. Here it is. Maybe benevolence plus competence only looks like tyranny because we're squeamish. Maybe a ruler who is brilliant and loving and almost always right has a genuine argument that asking permission would get people killed. If she'd held a vote on harvesting the cure, citizens die of the flu. If she'd waited for consent before prepping defenses, the threat arrives first. There is a real, serious case that a good enough ruler earns the right to decide for people precisely because she's good enough to be right when they'd be wrong. And honestly, some nights listening to her, I find that case hard to answer. I don't want to pretend it's flimsy. It isn't. And whether all that watching and steering was wise protection or paranoid overreach, the show never actually tells us. Fans go back and forth on it, and nothing official settles it. That ambiguity is on purpose. The series keeps the answer just out of reach, which is exactly why this stays an argument and not a verdict. So if every single act is defensible on its own, you'd think the case against her just collapses. But here's the hinge the rest of this turns on, and I'll keep it a question because I haven't earned more than a question yet. Even if every individual thing she does is forgivable, can a system where one unelected person decides everything for everyone ever be made right by good intentions? Hold that, gently, because there's one person who shows you the cost of all that benevolence better than anyone, someone she made on purpose and then couldn't bring herself to love, and his name is Lemongrab. Now, I want to leave the cameras and the prisons behind for a while, because there's a kind of wrongness that has nothing to do with policy and everything to do with what a person does when they decide to make another person. We've spent this long looking at how she governs the people she found already living in her kingdom. The watching, the deciding, the gentle hand that's always on the controls. But there's an older and quieter set of evidence, and I think it's sadder, and I've been putting it off because it's harder to talk about without my voice going soft. It isn't about how she treats her subjects. It's about how she treats the ones she builds from scratch. Because Princess Bubblegum doesn't only rule the Candy Kingdom. In a real and literal sense, she made it. She made the people in it. And once you sit with that, the moral weight shifts under your feet. Because now we're not asking whether she's allowed to watch her citizens or lock up a threat. We're asking what she owes to a creature that exists only because she wanted it to, that opened its eyes for the first time because she decided it should, that never asked to be here and was brought here anyway, to do a job. So let me tell you about the Earl of Lemongrab. And I want to be careful here, because this is the part where the show is funniest on the surface and most upsetting underneath. And the two things are happening in the same breath. In an episode called Too Young in the 3rd season, we meet him, the Earl of Lemongrab. And right away, the show frames him in a way that should make us pay attention. He's her creation. He's also, formally, her heir, the named successor to the throne of the Candy Kingdom. And he's described in the same gesture as the first of her experiments to go wrong. Sit with how much is packed into that single sentence. He was made on purpose. He was made to inherit. And he was, by the kingdom's own account, a mistake. 3 facts, all true at once, all about the same fragile, screeching, sour-faced person. In the episode, he tries to seize the throne, and the reason he gets the chance is that Bubblegum, at that moment, isn't herself. She's regressed. She's become, biologically, a child. And to understand why that matters, and why it raises the stakes instead of lowering them, I have to tell you something strange about what she actually is. Here's the thing that the show drops on you almost casually, and that reframes everything once you really take it in. Princess Bubblegum is, chronologically, around 827 years old. 8 centuries. She has watched things rise and fall that none of her citizens will ever know happened. But biologically, physically, In the body she walks around in, she's about 18. She's made of candy, sugar given a mind, and because of what she's made of, she can do something the rest of us can't. She can reform her own biomass. She can lose part of herself and, given time and the right material, rebuild it. Her body is, in a sense, editable. She's both impossibly ancient and freshly young, and she can rewrite her own flesh the way she rewrites everything else. I find that genuinely haunting, honestly, and not in a fun monster movie way. Imagine carrying 800 years of memory inside a body that looks like it just finished growing up. Imagine all that loss and all that history sitting behind a young face that never gets to look as old as it feels. 8 centuries of watching friends be born and grow old and slip away while you stay there. More or less the same, the constant one in every story. The one who has to remember everyone after they're gone. That does something to a person. I think it has to. And I want to hold that thought gently because it isn't an accusation. It's almost the opposite. It's the beginning of understanding her. When you've lived that long, when you've seen how easily things fall apart and how rarely they come back, you might start to feel that the only safe world is one you build and hold yourself. You might stop trusting that anyone else can be careful enough. And you might slowly, over centuries, start treating life itself as material. Because you've outlasted so much of it that it stops looking permanent and starts looking like something you can shape. I'm not excusing anything with that. I'm trying to feel my way into how a loving person becomes the kind of person who makes other people. Because that capacity, the biomass reformation, the editable flesh, it isn't only something she does to herself. It's the same power pointed outward that lets her do what she does to Lemongrab. The hand that can rebuild her own body is the hand that can build a brand new one. And once you can do that, once making a living thing is genuinely within your reach, a quiet and terrible question opens up that most of us never have to answer. Just because you can call a mind into being, should you? And what do you owe it once you have? And here's where it connects to Lemongrab. There was an attack. The Lich, in an episode from the 2nd season called Mortal Recoil, and in that attack she lost biomass. She lost part of the physical material that made up her body. And the result was that she regressed. She dropped down to a biological age of about 13. She became, physically, a young teenager, still carrying every one of those centuries inside. And it's during that vulnerable stretch, while she's diminished and young and not fully herself, that her own creation, her own named heir, makes his move for the throne. In Too Young, she gets the lost material back. She recovers the missing biomass and restores herself to 18, and she reclaims her rule. The grown ruler comes back and the experiment that tried to take her place is pushed aside. Now, I owe you a piece of honesty here, because I don't want to oversell the tidiness of any of this. The way those biological ages line up, the 13 and the 18 and the precise mechanics of losing and regaining biomass, a lot of that got nailed down more cleanly in later character descriptions than it was ever laid out neatly on screen at the time. When you watch Mortal Recoil and Too Young Cold, you get the shape of it, the shrinking and the recovering, but the exact numbers and rules were tightened up afterward, in the way these things often are. So when I give you crisp figures, read them as the settled version the franchise arrived at, not as something the early episodes spelled out in plain language. I'd rather tell you that than pretend it was all there from the first frame. But hold on to the emotional core of it, because the core is solid no matter how precise the numbers are. She made him, she named him her heir. He went wrong. And the first time her grip loosened, the first time she was weak and small and not at full strength, the thing she built reached for her throne. And I want to slow down on that picture, because there's a sad symmetry in it that's easy to rush past. Think about the shape of the scene. The ruler is diminished. She's been hurt, she's lost part of herself, she's been pushed back into a younger body. And she's in no condition to hold the kingdom the way she usually does. And in walks the heir, not an enemy from outside, not the Lich, not some invading horror. Her own design, the successor she planned for, stepping forward in the exact moment she's least able to stop him, to take the thing she always meant for him to have eventually anyway. There's almost a horrible logic to it. He's only doing, early and badly, what an heir is for. And the show lets you feel the betrayal of it, this creature she made turning on her. while also quietly suggesting that maybe he was always going to because of what he is and how he was brought up to see the throne. You can read his grab for power as treachery. You can also read it as a child doing the only thing his maker ever told him he existed to do, just sooner and clumsier than she wanted. Both readings hurt. And here's the reading I want to offer, and I want to mark it clearly as a reading and not a verdict the show hands you. I think Lemongrab is the purest test of everything I've been arguing. Everything else, the surveillance, the prisons, all of it you can argue about as policy. You can say a ruler has to watch, a ruler has to contain threats, hard choices, heady crown, and so on. But Lemongrab isn't a policy. He's a life. He's a sentient being with feelings, with a voice, with the capacity to suffer. And he exists for one reason. She needed an heir. She had a use for a person, so she made one. And the moment that person turned out to be inconvenient, the moment he failed to be the smooth, agreeable successor she presumably had in mind, the relationship curdles. That's the reading. Not that she's a monster, that she approached the creation of a living mind the way she approaches a recipe. And a living mind is not a recipe, and the gap between those two things is where I think the wrongness lives. It gets heavier. There's a later episode in the 4th season called You Made Me, and the title alone, when you hear it out loud, lands like a small accusation. You made me. That's the creature speaking to its creator. And in this one, we get more of the story, and it's worse, and it's tender, and it's hard. We learn that she created Lemongrab as an experiment. Those are roughly the terms. An experiment. And when he didn't fit, when he didn't get along with others, her solution was to isolate him. She put him away in his own castle, Castle Lemongrab, a whole separate place, off at a distance, where the difficult creation could be difficult somewhere she didn't have to manage it day to day. And the reason given, the stated reason, is simply that he doesn't get along with others. He's hard to be around, so he gets a castle and a kind of polite exile. Let me just stop and feel that for a second, because the comedy of the show moves so fast that you can miss the horror sitting right underneath it. A being was made, a thinking, feeling being who can want things, who can be lonely, who can be hurt. He was found wanting, and he was shelved, not destroyed, which I suppose we're meant to read as mercy, but set aside, put in a box that happens to be the size of a castle. Imagine being made by someone, brought into the world by a hand you can see and name, and then learning that you were a disappointment and that the response to your existence was distance. Picture the castle itself for a moment, the way you might if you were lying in the dark letting the image form. A whole structure, built or given to hold exactly one creature, big and cold and quiet. Rooms that don't need to be filled, because there's only him. No neighbors close enough to bother. No crowd to upset. Just the single, sour, anxious figure rattling around his space, scaled for many. Far enough from the kingdom that his difficulty becomes someone else's faint problem instead of a daily one. There's a particular loneliness to being given a great deal of room and no one to share it with. It isn't punishment exactly. He isn't in a cell. In some ways, he has more than most, and that's almost worse because it dresses the abandonment up as generosity. Here is a castle. Here is your distance. Please be difficult somewhere I can't hear you. I keep coming back to how reasonable it all sounds when you say it the kingdom's way. He doesn't get along with others. Of course, you'd give someone like that their own space. It's only when you remember that a someone is in there, alone, that the reasonableness starts to feel like a wound with a polite bandage over it. And then comes the part that I genuinely can't shake, because she does eventually try to address his loneliness. She notices on some level that this creature she made and isolated is alone, and her answer, her solution to a person's loneliness, is to make a second person. Another one, built specifically to keep the first one company. I want to argue that this single act is a kindness and a horror at the same time, in the same motion, and that you can't separate the two. It's a kindness because she's responding to suffering. She saw that he was lonely and she did something about it, and that's more than indifference, that counts for something. But look at what the something is. She answers one being's loneliness by manufacturing another being to absorb it. The cure for a person is a person, made to order. Company becomes a resource you fabricate, the way you'd produce a tool to fill a gap in a workshop. The second Lemongrab doesn't exist for his own sake. He exists as a fix. He's born to be a solution to someone else's problem. And there's something about treating sentient company as a thing you can just produce when needed that I find quietly devastating. Because it means the loneliness was real enough to act on, but the personhood of the cure was not real enough to pause over. Okay, I need a breath here because that one always gets me a little. The idea of being made to be someone else's company, not loved into being just produced to fill a hole. Let me sit with that and then keep going because the consequences are still coming. And the consequences come because the creation doesn't stay a sad, isolated figure in a faraway castle. The Earl of Lemongrab becomes a ruler in his own right, and he becomes a tyrant. He grows emotionally unstable and cruel. He straps shock collars on the candy citizens under him. The screeching, fragile experiment turns into something that hurts the people in his power. And then he does the thing that closes the loop and turns my blood cold. He makes more lemongrabs. Through biological means that the show keeps deliberately murky, he produces more of his own kind, more sour subjects to rule over. And I want to flag the murkiness honestly, because I don't want to invent details to make my case land harder. The exact biological methods of how lemongrabs get made are shown, but kept vague. The show gestures at the process without spelling it out, and that vagueness is doing work. It's letting your imagination supply a discomfort the screen never has to draw. And the language around his origin, that phrase, a failed experiment, implies that something went wrong in the process of making him, a flaw in the method. It does not say anywhere I can point to that anyone set out to harm him. There's a real difference between a creation that came out broken and a creator who intended cruelty. And the honest position is that what we're shown points much more to the first than the second. I'm not telling you she meant to make him suffer. I'm telling you that suffering is what the making produced. But here's the last reading I want to put on the table, and then I'll let it breathe. I think you can read his cruelty as ruler as partly inherited, not in blood, but in method. In lesson, look at what he learned, just by existing. He learned that a being can be brought into the world to serve a purpose. He learned that when a being is inconvenient, you isolate it. He learned that loneliness gets solved by manufacturing another being to fill the gap. He learned in the most direct way possible by being the object of it, that other beings are things. Things you can produce, things you can command, things you can make more of when you need them. So when he turns around and produces his own subjects and rules them by force, read this way, he isn't inventing his cruelty from nothing, he's repeating the only model of creation he was ever shown. He's doing to others exactly what was done to him, the student of a method that treats persons as products, applying the lesson faithfully. And I want to be fair to the other side of this, because it would be too easy to lay every cruel thing he ever does at her feet and call it solved. People aren't only their making. He had choices once he existed. Plenty of beings come from hard beginnings and refuse to pass the harm along. And you could argue Lemongrab had that path open to him and didn't take it, and that the failure to take it is his, not hers. That's a real counter-reading, and I won't pretend it away, but here's why I keep leaning back toward the first reading anyway. When you make a mind from nothing, you don't just give it a body, you give it its first and deepest picture of how the world treats people. Because you are the world to it. At the start, you're the only example it has, and the example she set, the lesson written into the very fact of his existence, was that beings get made for a use and managed for convenience. He didn't read that in a book. He lived it from the inside as the thing being used and managed. So when he does it back, harder and crueler, I can't fully separate his choice from the curriculum he was raised on. Read this way, his tyranny isn't a verdict on his soul. It's an echo, and the sound it's echoing started with her. And that, I think, is why this stretch of the argument sits so much heavier than the cameras did. The surveillance, the prisons, all of that was about what she does to people. People who were already there, already alive, already themselves, whom she watches and manages, and, in the harshest reading, controls. This is something else. This is about what she does to the people she makes, the ones who owe their entire existence to her, who came into being at her word and for her reasons, and who then have to live with whatever she decided they were for. That's a deeper kind of power than ruling. That's authorship. And the responsibility that comes with authoring a living mind is not the same as the responsibility of governing one. It's larger, and I think the show, gently, under all the screeching and the lemon yellow comedy, knows that it's larger. Which brings me to the oldest version of the question, the one underneath even this. Because if she could make a being to inherit her throne and a being to keep that being company, then we have to ask what she built into the citizens of the Candy Kingdom themselves, and whether a people can truly be said to consent to a ruler who designed them from the very beginning, never to question her. And this is the thing the show makes us wait years to hear out loud. The fact I promised you was hiding underneath the cameras. So let me finally say it, because once you know it, you cannot watch any of the rest the same way. I've been circling it all night, defending her, granting her the flu cure and the rescue of a kingdom that owed her nothing, and the warning about the dangerous child, letting the kindest version of her stand as tall as it can. I did that on purpose. I wanted the Steelman strong. I wanted her defense to be the best defense anybody could give, because the thing I'm about to set down is heavy enough that it deserves a fair fight and not a rigged one. You came here to drift off to something honest. So here it is, the deepest and, to me, the most damning thing the series ever quietly admits about her. And I'm going to lay it down slowly, the way you'd set something fragile on a table in the dark, because it's the kind of sentence you can hear and not feel land for a second or two. In the series finale, the long closing stretch of episodes that brings the whole story to its end, the show tells us that Princess Bubblegum created the Candy People with the intention that they would not question her decisions and would not try to overthrow her. I want to read that again with you, gently, because it's so easy to let it slide past as just one more piece of lore in a show stuffed with lore. The Candy People are a sentient race. Let me say what that means, plainly, in case you're half under and the word just floats by. It means they're not props, they're not scenery, they're not cute background filler invented to make the kingdom look lived in. They think, they feel, they love, and they're afraid, and they grieve, and they have inner lives running behind their eyes the way you have one running behind yours right now. They are people, and the person who made them built into them on purpose at the moment of their making an inability to truly say no to her. Sit with the shape of that, not a law on the books against rebellion, not a punishment waiting for anyone who tries it, something quieter than a law and so much deeper. She made them so that the thought itself would barely form, so the no would never quite arrive. I need to just stop here for a moment because, honestly, the first time that clicked for me, it took the wind clean out of me. You spend whole seasons watching the Candy People be silly and soft and endlessly sweet. You watch them faint at the smallest fright. You watch them panic and scatter and then throw a little party an hour later like nothing happened. You watch them line the streets and cheer for her, this small bright crowd of them, all gumdrops and frosting and wide trusting eyes turned up toward the castle. And the whole time you read it as comedy, as gentle world flavor, as the warm, faintly ridiculous texture of a candy kingdom. And then the show very calmly turns the lights on and tells you that the sweetness itself might be the design. That the reason they never march on the castle isn't that she governs so beautifully they never once want to. It might be that she made them unable to want it at all. The cheering might not be a verdict on how she rules. It might be a feature she installed. Okay, let me breathe and come back. But that's the weight I'm carrying into everything that's left tonight. And I want it sitting on your chest too, gently, the way it's sitting on mine. And I think the reason it lands so hard, the reason it doesn't feel like a fun little dark twist the way some reveals do, is that the show waited so long to tell us. Think about that choice for a second. They could have handed us this in season 1, made it a clean fact you carried from the start, and then it would just be a rule of the world no heavier than the color of the sky. Instead, they let us love these little creatures for years first. They let us laugh with them and worry over them and grieve the ones who didn't make it. And only then, near the very end, do they lean in and whisper that the thing you loved about them, the trust, the softness, the way they never seemed to want anything but to follow her, might have been put there. That's a cruel way to tell a truth. And I mean cruel as a compliment, because it works. It makes you complicit. You spend all that time reading their obedience as charm, and the show lets you sit in the discomfort of having found a leash adorable. I had to put the remote down the first time. I just sat there in the dark with it for a while. Now, let me tie this to the other half of it, the piece that landed years earlier and that I think the finale is quietly finishing. There's an episode where Bubblegum loses an election. The King of Ooh runs against her, and he wins. The candy people choose him. This obvious huckster, this loud, transparent fraud with nothing real behind the smile, over the woman who has kept them fed and warm and safe, and alive for longer than any of them can even remember. Picture her face in that. She has spent however many years pouring herself into these people, every late night, every hard call, every quiet act of protection she never explained. And they line up and they pick the con man, and in that moment, she has a realization that I think is the true center of gravity for everything I'm trying to say to you tonight. She understands that she created the candy people with insufficient intelligence to tell a good leader from a bad one. That's the confession. Not that they're foolish in a way that's cute and harmless, that she built them from the very start without the capacity to judge who ought to be in charge of them, without the equipment to tell the real thing from the fraud. And I want you to really hear what that confession implies about the design, because the show lets you do this math yourself and then never once forces it into your hands. If you create a people who cannot tell a good ruler from a bad one, then you have, in the same stroke, created a people who can never meaningfully judge you either. Think it through. They can't look at your long record and decide you've earned their trust, because the scale that would weigh it was never built into them. They can't withdraw that trust on any real grounds because they were never given the grounds to stand on. So when they follow you, day after day, year after year, it isn't a verdict. It isn't them seeing you clearly and choosing you anyway. It's closer to a reflex. It's the only thing they were ever made to do. And in that episode, she throws down her crown right there. And she flees. She walks away from all of it. And I used to read that purely as heartbreak. A good and devoted ruler wounded to the bone by an ungrateful kingdom. And I'd feel for her. I don't think it's only that anymore. I think part of what's crushing her in that moment, part of what's bending her back as she walks away, is that she is looking straight at the flaw and recognizing her own fingerprints all over it. They chose badly because she made them unable to choose well. The failure she's running from is, in the deepest sense, her own signature at the bottom of the page. Here's where it gets harder though, and I have to slow all the way down because this is the single most important caution in the whole script, and I will not skip past it just to make my point land sharper than the show has actually earned. That wouldn't be fair to her, and fairness is the whole reason I'm doing this slowly. So listen closely. We do not actually know that she dulled them on purpose to stop a rebellion. Those are two different episodes telling us two different things. The election episode gives us the limitation, the plain fact that the candy people can't distinguish good leaders from bad ones. The finale gives us the intent, the design that they would not question her or overthrow her. But the show never draws a clean, lit line between the two and says, in so many words, she made them dim precisely so they could never rise up. Whether that low capacity for judgment was a deliberate safeguard she engineered to prevent rebellion, or whether it was just a natural limitation of how she made them, an accident, a rough edge of an impossibly hard creative act, is left genuinely, deliberately ambiguous. I want to flag that as plainly as I possibly can, because it matters. The explicit no rebellion intent is confirmed only in the finale. It is not in those earlier episodes. And the link between the two, the bridge that turns the limitation into a motive, is something I am reading into the gap between them. It is not something the series ever hands me on a plate. Fans have theorized about it for years, going back and forth, and nothing official ever nails it shut. There's a broader fan reading floating around that the candy people were engineered as a controlled population from the very beginning, a designed and managed flock, and I have to be honest and tell you, the show leaves even that partly open, because it never fully settles whether they were deliberately created the way we think, or evolved into what they are. So please, hold the next stretch of what I say as interpretation, the strongest version of the prosecution I know how to build, offered as a reading, and never as a thing the show states as fact. Because with that caution set firmly in place, look at what this does Read this way to everything I spent the earlier part of tonight so carefully defending. Every single act of control I laid out for you. The wall of glowing monitors in that hidden shed. The secret labs, the orders given cold and without explanation. The watching, the steering, I defended each one as protection. As a guardian seeing dangers on the horizon that ordinary citizens simply couldn't. And I meant every word of it. I still think each piece can be read that way on its own. But now step back with me and ask a quieter, stranger question. Why would a ruler need all of that? The cameras, the secrecy, the unexplained commands, the constant surveillance, over a people she built to comply? Think about how odd that is. You don't need a heavy surveillance state to hold down a population that was engineered from birth to be unable to rebel. The lock and the perfectly docile prisoner don't really belong in the same room. If they truly can't say no, what exactly is all that watching for? And it's that mismatch, that little wrongness in the math, that turns my stomach now far more than the cameras ever did on their own back at the start of the night. Read this way, the surveillance stops looking like security against an outside threat. It starts looking like something much lonelier and much colder. A creator checking on her instruments, walking the rows in the dark, quietly making sure each one is still doing the thing it was built to do. And that's the reframe. And I told you hours ago that it would recolor all the earlier evidence. So let me actually do it now instead of just promising it again. Read with the design underneath it. The surveillance isn't an isolated overreach by a good leader having a bad stretch. The secrecy isn't one forgivable bad habit. The cold, unexplained orders aren't a string of separate little slips you can pardon one at a time the way I was pardoning them earlier. One by one, like a patient lawyer. Taken as a whole, with the founding underneath them, they stop being exceptions at all. They become the natural, ordinary, day-to-day management of a people who were made to be managed. That's the shift. The system isn't malfunctioning when she watches them through those screens. The system is running exactly as designed, and she is simply the one maintaining it, keeping it oiled, keeping it quiet. Which means the case against her was never really about any single camera or any single order. I just didn't have the bottom of it yet. I was arguing the surface. The bottom isn't the watching. The bottom is the making, the original act before any camera was ever switched on. So let me state the central claim I've been building toward all night, as cleanly as I can make it, and marked clearly every word of it as my reading and not as gospel. What this suggests, read this way, is that the original wrong, the one lying underneath all the others, the one the whole night has been slowly walking down toward, isn't any single act of control at all. It's the founding act. It's the decision to design a sapient people, beings who genuinely think and feel and ache, to be obedient, and to be unable to judge the one who rules over them. And if that reading holds, then consent was engineered out of the system before the system ever drew its first breath. Stay with that because it's the coldest part. There was never a first morning on which the candy people could have agreed to her rule, or refused it, and chosen to stay. She made them downstream of that choice. They woke up already saying yes. The yes was poured into them before they ever opened their eyes. And a yes that was built into you before you were even conscious enough to mean it isn't really a yes at all, is it? It's just the sound you were made to make. That, read at its deepest, is what I think the show is quietly, almost unbearably handing us underneath all the bright candy color. Not a tyrant, a maker, which is somehow worse, and I'll get to why. And I want to be careful with that word, worse, because it's a strange thing to say and I don't want it sliding by unexamined. A tyrant, even a terrible one, at least faces people who can in principle resist. There's a relationship there, ugly as it is. Two sides, a ruler and the ruled. And the ruled could in theory rise up, could in theory be wrong about her, and come around, could look at her one day and choose to follow her for real. A maker who designs away the capacity to resist removes the other side entirely. There's no one left across the table. The resistance isn't crushed, it was simply never built, and you can't even mourn a rebellion that was made impossible before anyone existed to attempt it. That's the part that unsettles me more than any single cruel act could. A cruel act you can point at, you can condemn, you can imagine undone. But how do you condemn the shape of someone's mind being decided for them before they had one? Where do you even file that? The show, to its enormous credit, doesn't tell you where. It just lets the question hang there in the candy-colored air and trusts you to feel the weight of it. Now bring back the baby with me, because this is where the whole pattern finally shows its full shape, and I want it at full weight. No softening. Earlier tonight, I bent over backwards to be fair about the infant flame princess, and I stand by every bit of it. So let me say it again so nobody can accuse me of quietly moving the goalposts. Bubblegum did not build the cell. She gave the Flame King a warning. The imprisonment of that child was his act, carried out by him on his own daughter, and the in-universe danger was real. A being whose elemental instability could, in the very worst case, have grown into something that threatened the entire world. I am not taking a word of that back. The cell was not hers. But now, set that scene down right beside the founding of the Candy People, lay them next to each other in the dark, and look at the shape they share, because the shared shape is the whole argument. In both cases, you have Princess Bubblegum deciding, at the deepest level there is, the level of a being's very existence, its very freedom, what that being will be allowed to become. With the Candy People, she decides at the very moment of their making that they will be compliant, that they will not be able to judge her or refuse her. With the infant, the counsel is that this child should be contained, shut away, before she can ever grow into the thing she might one day become. Different beings, different kingdoms, different episodes, years apart, and the same instinct humming underneath both of them. The instinct to reach all the way down to the root of a life and quietly set its limits there, to decide in advance, before the being can speak for itself, what it is permitted to be. And that, right there, is the pattern I can't unsee anymore, and it's exactly why this is the low point of the whole night for me, the saddest place this argument goes. So let me give you the version of it that actually aches, and I'll mark this too as my reading, gently, because that's all it is. I don't think this is greed. I've never once thought that about her tonight, not for a second. A ruler who tortures for raw power, who spies to crush dissent and keep a boot on everyone's neck, who breeds a docile race purely to fatten and serve herself. That's an easy villain. A flat one. A boring one. And whatever she isn't that. What the show implies, read at its most human, is so much sadder and so much harder to hate. This is what control looks like when it grows out of love and fear instead of greed. Let that sit. She wasn't trying to own the Candy People the way a miser owns gold. I genuinely believe that, in her own mind, she was trying to keep them safe. Safe the way she tried to keep the Fire Kingdom from freezing to death. Safe the way she tried to spare the whole world from a child who might one day burn it down. And here's the trap that closes on a person like that, the terrible logic of it. To keep something perfectly safe, you eventually have to take away its ability to choose wrong. And to take away its ability to choose wrong, you have to take away its ability to choose at all. There's no clean stopping point in between. So she made a world that could never ever tell her no. And here's the loneliest part of that, the part I keep circling back to in the quiet long after the episode's over. If you make a people who can never tell you no, then in the very same act, with the very same hand, you make a people who can never really tell you yes. You can't have one without the other. You make a world that can't argue with you, can't surprise you, can't look at you across a room and see you clearly enough to love you on purpose, freely, the way one real person chooses another. They follow her because they were built to follow her, not because they weighed her and found her worth following. Which means that even their devotion, all that cheering, all those upturned, trusting faces, can't actually comfort her. Not really. Not where it counts. Because she, of anyone, knows exactly what's underneath it. She engineered the loyalty herself, which means she can never once fully trust it, can never quite believe it's hers and not just hers by construction. Picture how alone that is. The love of a creator who could not bear to be questioned by the very things she loved, and who therefore had to live out the rest of her long days inside a kingdom that adored her, that would never raise a hand against her, and that could never, not for one true moment, actually know her. That's the trade she made, if this reading is anywhere near right. Total safety, total control, and underneath them a loneliness so complete it has no edges to push against, because there is no one left in the entire candy world who can stand outside her design and meet her, plainly as an equal. She made them, and in making them like that, in making them safe, she sealed herself away from them forever. And the part that really gets me, the small human detail underneath the big sad idea, is that she would have to know it. She's the smartest person in her whole world. She isn't someone who could fool herself for long about what she'd done. So picture her on an ordinary day, walking through the streets, the candy people waving and beaming and calling out to her, every face turned up bright and warm, and her smiling back, and the whole time some quiet corner of that brilliant mind knowing the warmth was wired in, knowing she can never test it, never find out what any of them would feel about her if they'd been built free to feel anything at all. That's a specific kind of ache. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a low, permanent hum under everything. The kind you stop being able to hear because it never once stops. You can be surrounded, completely surrounded by love, and starving in the middle of it. Because you're the only one who knows it isn't quite real. I don't think the show ever spells that out for her in so many words. But once you've seen the design, you can't help reading it into every quiet shot of her standing slightly apart from her own happy crowd. A little island in the middle of a kingdom that adores her on command. Let me set all of that down softly for a second before I pick anything else up, because it's a lot to carry, and if you're drifting right now, I honestly don't blame you. This is the heavy middle of the night. This is the part where the candy colors go gray. While I've got a quiet moment with you, one small, genuine thing, and then I'll let you sink right back down into it. If sitting with a sad cartoon at this strange hour, taking it seriously, turning it over slowly in the dark like it actually matters, is the kind of company that helps you let the day finally go, then quietly subscribing is a tiny, free way to keep these long nights coming. And it does honestly mean something to me on this end. That's the whole of it. No more from me on that, I promise. Back into the dark with the rest. So sit with where we've landed, because it's the saddest reframe I've got in me, and I'm not going to dress it up or hand you a comforting bow to tie on it. The sweetness was maybe the leash. The cheering was maybe the engineering. The endless, gentle loyalty was maybe just the design, doing what it was made to do. And the woman standing at the center of all of it isn't a monster twirling a mustache in a tower. She's something far more wrenching and far harder to look away from. A brilliant, loving, deeply frightened person who looked out at a world absolutely crammed with danger and decided somewhere along the way that the only sure way to protect the things she loved was to make certain they could never disagree with her. That's the reading. Offered the way I've offered every piece of this tonight. Gently, with both hands open, as one way to see her, and not the only way, and never as the verdict. And here's the thing, if that's even close to right, then a weight like that was never going to hold, was it? A person can only carry something that heavy, that lonely, for so long before something deep inside her finally gives way, and the crown gets too heavy to lift, which is exactly where I want to take you next. Into the night the ruler finally broke. But if I stopped at the indictment, I would be leaving out the part that keeps me up, because the most controlling ruler in Olivu is also, by the end, the one who walks away. And the why of it is sadder than any tyranny. I've spent this long building a case. I've laid the cameras out on the table, and the prison, and the maid people, the air she shelved, and the company she manufactured to fix a loneliness she caused. I've argued as hard and as fairly as I know how that there's a wrongness here, and that the wrongness lives in the very benevolence, in the loving certainty that she always knows best, and I stand by all of it. But a case isn't a person. A case is the worst true things about someone, stacked up in the order that makes the point. And if I leave you there, with the stack, I've told you something accurate and something dishonest at the same time. Because the woman who built all of that machinery is also, quietly, in episodes most people skip right past, a woman who let it go. So I want to turn now away from the peak of the prosecution and walk down into the part of her story that complicates everything I've just said. And I'll warn you, this is the obscure stretch. This is the material that even people who love the show sometimes can't quite place, because it's scattered across the back half of the run. In the quieter episodes, the ones that don't make the highlight reels. It's the chunk where the argument stops feeling like an argument and starts feeling like watching someone you've been hard on turn out to be tired in a way you didn't see. Let the night go quiet for this part. This is where it gets soft. Because here's the thing the indictment can't hold. A tyrant, the real kind, the kind the word is built for, Does not let go. That's almost the definition. You hold on, you tighten, you make yourself necessary, and then you make sure no one can do without you, and you die in the chair if you can manage it. The grip is the whole point, and Princess Bubblegum, the surveillance state, the woman with a lens inside a citizen's face, does something a tyrant is structurally incapable of doing. She steps off. She throws the crown down. She walks out of the kingdom she built, the kingdom she watches, the kingdom she made out of her own hands, and she leaves it to someone else. And I don't think you can call her what I've been half calling her and also explain that. The two pictures don't sit flush, so I have to make room for the second one, and making room for it is going to cost the case some of its certainty, which is exactly why I'm doing it. Let me start with the confession, because it's the emotional key to all of this, and it comes in one of the gentlest scenes in the whole show. The episode is called Varnance, the second episode of the 7th season, and it aired in November of 2015. And what happens in it is mostly two old friends walking around together, Bubblegum and Marceline, going back through a place that used to matter to both of them, dealing with some creatures tearing up a garden, but really just talking the way you talk when there's a lot of unspoken history in the air, and neither of you wants to be the one to name it. And somewhere in there, Bubblegum says something she has, as far as we ever see, never said to anyone. She tells Marceline she's made her peace with being out of power, that the crown had been its own kind of cage. And then she explains why, and the why is the saddest small sentence in the whole argument. The Candy Kingdom used to be so small, and so manageable, and then it kept growing, and growing. I need to sit on that because the first time it really landed for me, I had to pause the episode. Growing and growing. That's not the confession of a tyrant. That's the confession of someone who got overrun by the very thing she loved. And here's the reading I want to offer, and I'll mark it clearly as a reading, because the show gives you the line and lets you make of it what you will. I think that single confession reframes the whole grip on power. I've been describing her control as if it were appetite, as if she watched her citizens because some part of her needed to be the one watching, needed to be at the center, needed the kingdom to run through her. And maybe some of that's true, but Varmint suggests something else, something I find much harder and much sadder. It suggests that the control was never hunger, it was dread. Read this way, she didn't reach for the cameras because she loved looking. She reached for the cameras because the kingdom got too big to know. When it was small, she could know everyone. She could hold the whole thing in her head. Every face, every name, every little life, the way you can hold a small town or a big family. That's not surveillance. That's just care at a scale a person can manage. And then it grew. And it grew past the edge of what one mind can hold. And what this suggests, read gently, is that the watching was her trying to keep knowing a place that had gotten too large to know the honest way. The screens were a substitute for the intimacy she used to have for free, back when the kingdom was small enough to love one face at a time. The secrecy, the lenses, the monitoring room, all of it read in this light becomes the desperate engineering of a person trying to stay close to something that kept getting further away by getting bigger. Growth, not malice, is what hardened her. The love stayed the same size. The kingdom didn't. Now, I owe you an honesty here, the same kind I've owed you all the way through. Because I don't want to hand you a sad story and pretend it's verified just because it moves me. We don't actually know whether her account in Varmints is the truth. We know it's what she says. We know it's how she narrates it to Marceline years later, looking back. But whether that's honest self-assessment or a story she's built to live with herself, I genuinely can't tell you, and nothing official confirms which it is. People do this. When something is taken from us, or when we let something go in a moment of weakness or distraction, we tend to go back and write a cleaner version. A version where we chose it. A version where we were wise and tired rather than caught off guard and humiliated. So when she tells Marceline she walked away on purpose because the kingdom grew too big, you can take that as the real reason, the deep true cause finally spoken aloud to the one person she trusts. Or you can hear it as the gentle, self-protective story a proud person tells after a loss, the narrative she needs in order to have stepped back with dignity instead of having stumbled back in defeat. I lean toward believing her, honestly. But I want you to know, that's a lean, not a fact, and the show leaves the door open on purpose. Because the actual letting go, the moment it physically happens, is a good deal less dignified than the varmint's confession makes it sound. And this is the episode almost nobody remembers, so let me walk you through it slowly. It's called Hot Diggity Doom, and it's from the very end of the 6th season, June of 2015. There's a comet coming. The Catalyst Comet, this enormous cosmic event bearing down on the world. The kind of thing that, if you're Princess Bubblegum, if you're the 800-year-old scientist who understands exactly what a comet like that can mean, consumes your entire attention. And it does. She's distracted. Her mind is up in the sky, on the thing that might end everything, on the science of survival at the largest possible scale. And while she's looking up, something small and human and political is happening down at ground level. There's an election, an actual election, for who rules the Candy Kingdom. And because she's not paying attention, because her head is full of the comet, she loses it. She loses the election to the King of Oo, this preening, hollow con artist, this salesman in a crown. And in the moment she loses, she takes the crown off and she throws it down and she leaves. Let me just hold that image, because it's such a strange and quiet thing for this show to give us. The most powerful, most controlling figure in all of Oo. The woman who watches everyone. The woman who, I've been arguing, can't bear to not be in control of the world she made, and she takes the symbol of all of it off her own head, drops it on the ground, and walks away from a fool. No coup, no last stand, no clinging. She just puts it down and goes. If you'd told me 3 episodes into my case that this is how her reign ends, I'm not sure I'd have believed you, because it doesn't fit the tyrant. It fits something else. It fits someone who, on some level, she might not even admit was relieved to set it down. And before I tell you what happens next, I have to flag something because it matters for how hard I'm allowed to push this. It would be very tempting to read that election as the people finally rejecting her. To say, look, the Candy people got their chance at the ballot, and they threw out the authoritarian, they repudiated the surveillance and the control. The tyranny lost at the polls. That's a clean story and it would fit the case I built. But the show doesn't actually say that. The show is explicit that she loses because she's distracted by the comet, not because the citizens rose up in some considered rejection of how she'd ruled them. The text gives the loss a cause, and the cause is her own divided attention, not a popular verdict on her authoritarianism. So if I told you the election was the people repudiating her tyranny, I'd be putting words in the show's mouth that it pointedly doesn't say. The most I can honestly claim is that she lost because she looked away. The reading where it's a referendum on her rule is one the text only partly supports, and I'd rather underclaim it than steal an argument I didn't earn. And honestly, while we're sitting here in the quiet part of the night, going slow through the episodes most people scroll right past, if these careful late-night walks through a show you love are the thing that finally lets your shoulders drop, a gentle subscribe is a real kindness and it keeps me able to make them. That's all. Back to the kingdom, and to what it does once she's gone. Because here's where the whole argument gets complicated in a way I didn't expect when I started building it. She leaves. The King of Oo takes over, and the kingdom she built, the people I've spent this entire video describing as designed to be compliant, designed not to question, engineered toward obedience, those people, without her, do something. They rebel. It happens across the back of the 7th season, and it comes to a head in an episode called The Dark Cloud from November of 2015, which is woven into the larger stakes story. The King of Oo turns out to be exactly the empty fraud he always was, and the Candy people will not have it. They rebel against him. And in the middle of that rebellion, there's a moment I find almost unbearably tender because of who it involves. Crunchy, a minor Candy citizen, a small background person, the kind of face you'd never expect to matter. And Crunchy stands up and declares himself princess, not king, princess, reaching in the only way a loyal little Candy person knows how, for the shape of the ruler they lost. And out of all of that, the rebellion, the rejection of the fraud, the reaching, Bubblegum is restored. She comes back, not because she seized it back, because they wanted her back. And I have to be fair to my own case here and admit what that does to it. I built a long argument that she designed to people who couldn't truly consent, who were made to accept her, who never had the genuine option to refuse. And then the show goes and shows me those same people handed a different ruler looking at the alternative and choosing her back. rising up on their own to undo the thing that replaced her. That cuts against me. I'm not going to pretend it doesn't. If they were truly nothing but compliant dolls, they'd have accepted the King of Ooh as placidly as they ever accepted her, because compliance doesn't care who holds the leash. But they didn't accept him. They revolted. They chose. And the one they chose was her. So let me offer the reading that the show seems to be half-handing me here, and mark it as a reading because it genuinely complicates the verdict. I think the rebellion against the King of Ooh is the show quietly half-agreeing with her. Remember the deepest fear I tried to read into her control, that her grip on power was never simple lust, but the terror of a creator who believes, maybe correctly, that if she lets go, the thing she made will fall apart. Well, she let go, and it started to fall apart. The fraud took over, and the kingdom degraded, and it took the people themselves clawing back to set it right. What this suggests, read this way, is that her dread wasn't paranoia. It was, at least partly, accurate. She really might be the only one who can hold this thing she made. The world really might need her in the specific way she always feared it did. And that's such an uncomfortable thing for my argument to have to swallow, because it means the control I called wrong might also have been, in some hard practical sense, true. The benevolent dictator looks at the wreckage left by her absence and gets to say, quietly, "I told you so." And the worst part is, she might be right. Or, and I have to hold the other reading open too, because this is supposed to be honest, or the rebellion isn't proof that she was right. It's proof of exactly what I accused her of. Maybe the candy people chose her back not because she's genuinely necessary. Maybe a people designed around one ruler will always reach for that ruler when she's gone, not because no one else could do the job, but because she made sure from the beginning that they couldn't imagine anyone else in the shape of it. Crunchy declares himself princess. Princess. He reaches for her template even in revolt, and you can read it as love, free, and freely given. Or you can read it as the deepest evidence yet that she shaped what they're even able to want. I genuinely think both readings are alive in those episodes, and I think the show knows it and refuses to settle it for you, and that refusal is going to matter enormously when we get to the end. But set the verdict aside for a moment, because there's something I haven't told you yet about what she actually did with her time away. And it's the part that does the most to complicate the cold portrait I painted. She didn't spend her withdrawal plotting a return. She didn't sulk in exile, sharpening her resentment. While she was stepped back from the throne, across the stake story, that long run of episodes through the middle of the 7th season, she spent that time on something almost startlingly small and human. She spent it taking care of a friend. Marceline was going through the worst crisis of her long life, the vampire crisis, the thing that threatened to unmake who she was. And Bubblegum was there, not as a ruler, not managing a kingdom, not running numbers on a threat to her citizens, not deciding anything for anyone, just there beside one person who was scared and hurting, helping her through it, present, a friend at a bedside instead of a queen at a console. And I want you to feel the contrast, because it's the whole point of this stretch. For most of this video, I've shown you a woman who relates to living things as material, who makes people for purposes, who watches people through lenses, who decides what's best and arranges the world to deliver it whether or not anyone agreed. And here, stripped of the crown, with no kingdom to manage and no machinery to run, what does she do? She loves one person, slowly, at the speed and the scale a single human heart can actually manage. One friend, one crisis, one long stretch of just being there. It's the smallest unit of care there is, and it's the one I never saw from her while she was on the throne, because the throne never let her get that close to anyone. And think about what that closeness must have cost her to allow, given everything else we know. This is a woman who, by her own account, watches because she can't bear not to know. Who fixes loneliness by building, who has spent 8 centuries learning over and over that the things she loves get sick and get old and slip away while she stays. To sit at a friend's bedside through a crisis that might unmake that friend, with no control panel, no machine, nothing to manufacture, no way to engineer the outcome, just presence and the terror of maybe losing her anyway. That is the most exposed I think we ever see Princess Bubblegum. The crown, for all its weight, is also a kind of armor. It lets you love a whole kingdom from behind glass, at a distance where no single loss can reach all the way in. And she set the armor down. She let herself be small enough and close enough to be hurt. Read this way, the withdrawal didn't diminish her. It returned her to the size where love actually works. The size the Candy Kingdom used to be back before it grew and grew, when she could hold a thing by holding it instead of by watching it. Honestly, of everything in this whole argument, that's the image I'd want you to drift off on. Not the wall of screens. Her, sitting with one frightened person in the dark, useful at last in the only way that ever really counts. So let me draw the threads together, gently, because they want to come together into a reading that's sadder than anything I accused her of. Put the confession next to the abdication, next to the rebellion, next to the bedside. Set them in a row and look at them. A woman who governs by watching, who can't seem to let the kingdom out of her sight, tells her oldest friend that it all got too big to hold. Then she sets the crown down and walks away from a fool without a fight. Then the people she supposedly built to be helpless rise up and drag her back. And in the gap between losing it and getting it back, she finally does the one thing the crown never let her do, which is to sit with a single suffering person and just be of use. What this suggests, read all together, is that the control I've been calling an appetite was the opposite of an appetite. It was a burden she didn't know how to put down, and the moment circumstance forced her to put it down, she didn't grab for more, she breathed. The grip wasn't greed. The grip was the white-knuckled hold of the only person who believed she was allowed to let go, on a world she'd made too large for any one person to hold, and too dependent on her to hand safely to anyone else. And there's the structural irony, and I'll mark this last one as the reading that haunts me most. She built a people who could not question her. That was the original wrongness, the deepest one, the foundation under all the rest. And then that very design turned around and trapped her. Because if you build a people who can't truly stand on their own without you, who reach for your shape even when you're gone, who fall to the first fraud the moment you step off, then you have not built yourself a throne. You've built yourself a sentence. You've made certain that you can never actually leave because you've engineered a world that genuinely cannot hold itself up without your hands underneath it. The compliance she created became the chain that bound her to the chair. Sit with the shape of that for a moment because it's almost too neat, and the neatness is what makes it ache. The thing she did to feel safe is the exact thing that guaranteed she never could be. She wanted a world that wouldn't fall apart, so she made one that couldn't hold itself together. She wanted to never be questioned, and the price of never being questioned is being the only one who knows the answers, the only one who can be called, the only one the whole weight comes back to at every hour, with no one beside her who is ever allowed to grow large enough to share it. She made them unable to carry themselves, and so she became the only one allowed to carry them, forever, alone, 800 years and counting. The constant one who has to stay because she made sure no one else could. Read this way, the deepest cruelty she committed against herself, by accident, at the very beginning, and spent the rest of her long life paying for it with the loneliness no second lemon grab could ever be built to fix. The benevolent dictator's reward for being right about everything is that she gets to be right about everything by herself in the dark with the screens, while the people she saved sleep soundly because she's awake. That's the part that keeps me up. Not the cameras. This, and much later in an episode called Bonnie Bell Bubblegum, from the 10th season, she gets a chance to look back across all of it, to reflect on the person she's been and the things she's done. And the very fact that the show eventually lets her turn around and face her own history tells you it was never going to let her off easy, and never going to simply condemn her either. So now we have to ask the hardest version of the question, the one all of this has been quietly walking toward, which is what we do with a verdict when the show itself refuses to hand us one. So let me bring us all the way back to that wall of glowing screens, because I think the show finally answers the question I asked you at the start. Just not with the clean yes or no either side was hoping for. You remember the room, the shed lit only by monitors, every screen a citizen who didn't know they were being watched. Cinnamon Bun reaching up and pulling a camera out of his own gentle face. That's where we began, and I think it's right that we end somewhere near it, because the show keeps circling back to it too, and the way it finally lets that image rest is, I'd argue, the closest thing to a verdict we're ever going to get. And the verdict isn't a verdict at all. That's the thing I want to sit with you in the dark over. After everything, After the cameras and the chips and the order to torture and the lemon yellow grief of the creatures she made, the show refuses to stamp her guilty and it refuses to let her off. And I've come to think that refusal is the whole point rather than a failure of nerve. So I'm not going to give you the cheap ending. I could. It would be easy. And honestly, it would be satisfying in the way a tidy thing is satisfying right before you fall asleep. I could line up the evidence one last time and bring down the gavel and say, there, she's a tyrant. Case closed. Sleep well. Or I could go the other way, the warm way, and tell you she was misunderstood all along, a good woman doing hard things in a cruel world. And you should feel fine about loving her. Both of those endings are available to me. Both of them lie a little. Because the honest shape of this, the shape the show itself keeps insisting on, is messier than a sentence, and I think you deserve the mess more than you deserve the comfort. So let me finally pay off the loop I opened all of this with. The one I told you back near the start I'd only half finished. The cameras. Because here's the piece I kept promising to come back to, and now's the time. In that same episode where we discover the wall of screens, at the close of it she turns the monitors off herself. She's the one who pulls the plug. Nobody storms the shed. Nobody catches her and shames her into it. There's no mob, no rival, no Finn standing in the doorway with his arms crossed telling her she's gone too far. She just looks at what she built. This quiet room full of other people's private lives, all those little windows into people who trusted her, and something in her turns, and she decides, alone with no one watching her decide, that it's wrong, and she shuts it down. I want to slow all the way down here because I think this is the single most important moment in the whole defense, and I rushed past it on purpose earlier so it would land harder. Think about what it actually means for a person to correct herself in private. Most of the time, when the powerful stop doing a wrong thing, it's because they got caught. The wrongness becomes a liability. The pressure builds, the cost gets too high, and they fold. And we call it accountability even though it's really just arithmetic. That's not what happens in the shed. There's no pressure on her. The system is working. The citizens love her. The kingdom is safe. The loop is humming along exactly the way it was built to hum. By every cold measure, she could keep watching forever and lose nothing. And she stops anyway. Read this way. That's the first true evidence of conscience in the entire argument. Not a speech about ethics. Not a public apology. A quiet, unwitnessed choice to dismantle her own power over people. Made by the one person who would never have to. The system corrects. And here's what gets me. It corrects from the inside. The check on the dictator turns out to be the dictator's own heart in a dark room with the monitors still glowing, deciding on its own that this is not who she wants to be. And I keep snagging on the privacy of it, because privacy is doing so much work in that scene, and it's easy to walk right past. There was no one to perform for. When you give something up in front of a crowd, there's always a part of you buying something with the gesture, applause, forgiveness, the relief on people's faces. None of that was on offer in the shed. She got nothing for it. No witness, no reward, not even the small, clean feeling of having been seen doing the right thing, because nobody saw. Whatever made her reach for that plug, it had to come from somewhere with no audience attached. And that's the part I can't fit into the picture of a tyrant no matter how I turn it. Tyranny is, in a way, always a performance, always aimed at someone. This was aimed at no one. This was just a person, alone, looking at the reach of her own power and quietly deciding it was too much, and then making it less. I don't know what you call that, but I don't think the word is tyrant. And I have to be fair, because fairness is the whole job, and that moment cuts hard against the case I've been building all night. A tyrant doesn't do that. The whole frightening logic of the benevolent dictator is that she never has to answer to anyone, and the deepest fear underneath that logic is that no one inside the system can stop her. Well, she stopped herself. The thing the prosecution most worries can't happen, happened. And it happened quietly, and she didn't tell anyone she'd done it. So hold that image one more time. The dark monitors, the plug pulled by her own hand, because everything else I'm about to say has to live next to it. Which brings me to the finale, because if the camera's coming off is the first evidence of conscience, then I think the ending of the whole show is the culmination of it. The place where that same turn happens again but bigger, and out loud, and with the fate of everything riding on it. Come along with me, the series finale, the 4-part close of the 10th season that aired in September of 2018. And here's the situation she finds herself in. She's at war with Gumbald. And Gumbald, I want you to really hold on to this, is one of her own creations. Another being she made who became an antagonist who turned against her exactly the way Lemongrab once reached for her throne. So look at the shape of it. At the very end of her story, the threat isn't some outside horror crawling over the hills. It's the thing she built, come back around. The author, one last time, face to face with what she authored. And here's where the show does something I find genuinely moving, and I want to mark it clearly as my reading rather than a thing the script announces. She battles Gumbald, yes, but she doesn't win the way she's always won. She doesn't out-engineer him. She doesn't reach for the iron hand inside the candy glove and crush the problem the way the woman with the wall of screens would have. Instead, in the middle of it, she realizes that the violent conflict is unnecessary, that she doesn't have to fight this to the end at all, and rather than force the outcome, she sets the war down, and she and former antagonists, old enemies, the people she used to manage and contain and outmaneuver, cooperate. They join together to face Golb, the far greater threat, the brilliant strategist who always had a plan, who always saw the catastrophe coming before anyone else, reaches the last fight of her life and chooses, of all things, to stop strategizing and let other people stand beside her. Let me just breathe on that for a second, because honestly it gets me every time, and for me it lands like the quiet answer to everything that came before. Here's what I want to argue the finale is really doing, and I'll flag it hard as interpretation, because the show would never be so blunt as to say it. Read this way, that choice of non-violence and cooperation is the quiet repudiation of her founding logic. The whole machine I described to you, the watching, the chips, the engineered obedience, all of it grew from one root assumption, that the only safe world is one she shapes and holds herself, that other wills are a danger to be managed. And in the finale, for once, she stops trying to engineer the outcome. She lets other wills exist beside hers. She trusts people she spent the series not trusting. The ruler who built a room to watch everyone ends her story standing shoulder to shoulder with the very people she once would have controlled, and winning, if you can even call it winning, precisely by not controlling them. That's the cameras coming off again, isn't it? The same turn, the same hand reaching for the plug, just on the scale of a whole life this time instead of a single shed. And there's a smaller, quieter episode I have to set next to that, because it's where the show lets her actually look back. Bubblegum, from the 10th season, from September of 2017, and in it she reflects on her own arc, on her growth, on the long shape of who she's been. Bonnie Belle Bubblegum, not Princess, just the name. And I think that's deliberate, and I think it's tender, because for the length of this whole argument, I've mostly called her by the title, the office, the role, Princess Bubblegum, the ruler, the watcher, the maker. And here the show pulls the title off for a moment and just lets her be a person with a history. A being, finally, looking back at what she made and what it cost. The candy people, the Lemongrabs, Gumbald, an immortal candy-based scientist who has spent centuries calling minds into existence and then living with every one of them, the good and the failed, and the ones that turned on her. To reflect like that, you have to be willing to see your own hands. You have to be willing to count the cost of having been the one who decided. And the show gives her that. It lets her look, and there's something almost unbearably lonely in that for me, when I let myself feel it the way you might, half asleep, with the lights low. Because she's the one who remembers. She always has been. Every creation, every citizen, every friend with an ordinary lifespan, they come and they go. And she stays, the constant one, the keeper of the whole record. So when she looks back across her own arc, she isn't just reviewing decisions the way you or I might second guess a thing we did last year. She's looking back across centuries at being after being that she summoned into the world and then outlived, or disappointed, or had to manage, or had to fight. That's a lot of looking back. That's a lot of hands to own. And the show doesn't flinch from giving her the moment, doesn't let her off with a montage of victories, but quietly asks her, and us, to hold the whole ledger at once, the love and the cost in the same glance. So let me try to put the whole thesis back together now, and I want to reframe it because I think I've been describing it slightly wrong all night. And the ending is what corrects me. I kept talking like this was a trial. Prosecution, defense, evidence, verdict. But a trial asks, What did she do? And was each act a crime? And I no longer think that's the right question, because you can answer it both ways and still feel like you've missed her entirely. Here's the reframe. Maybe the wrongness was never in any single act at all. Maybe it wasn't the cameras, or the order, or the exile of a sour little creature to a castle too big for him. Maybe every one of those, taken alone, really can be defended the way the defense defended them as triage, as protection, as a guardian seeing the catastrophe first. Maybe the wrongness lives somewhere underneath all of it, in the founding design, in the original assumption that a good world is one built by a hand that never has to ask, that the people in it, the ones she found, and the ones she made, were safest when they were shaped to never say no to her. And if that's where the wrongness actually lived, in the design rather than the deeds, then watch what happens to the idea of her redemption, because it changes shape completely. The redemption isn't that she becomes good. She was always, in her way, good, brilliant and loving and almost always right, exactly as the defense kept insisting. No. Read this way, the redemption is something quieter and stranger and harder. It's that she finally stops requiring the world to never say no to her. That's the arc. Not from bad to good, but from a person who needed the outcome guaranteed to a person who could, at the very end, let it be uncertain. Who could put down the controls and stand among other wills and not know how it would go. The cameras off, the war set aside, the enemies turned to allies she didn't get to command. Every one of those is the same small miracle, a woman who built her whole life around control, loosening her grip on purpose, and surviving it. But I promised you I wouldn't give you the cheap ending, and a redemption arc, clean and rising, is its own kind of cheap. So let me hold both readings in tension all the way to the end, the way I've tried to all night, because I don't think you get to keep only the warm one. The prosecution still stands, and it stands tall. A benevolent dictatorship is still a dictatorship. The fact that she was kind about it, that she meant well, that she usually got it right does not unmake the architecture. And the deepest charge, the one I keep coming back to, isn't the watching at all. It's the engineering of obedience. It's that she made people beings who could think and want and ache, and she built them, at least by one reading, to never rise against her. To design a mind that cannot say no to you and then call its loyalty love, that's the wrong underneath the wrong, and no amount of late life growth fully pays it back. The plug pulled in the shed doesn't give Cinnamon Bun back the years he was a camera. The cooperation in the finale doesn't unbuild the lemongrabs. And I have to be careful and honest about that last and heaviest charge, the way I've tried to be careful all night, so let me reaffirm the caution I've been carrying. The strongest single version of the prosecution, the claim that she designed her people specifically so they'd never rebel, rests on intent that the show really only makes plain very late, in the finale itself. It comes down, in the end, to roughly one stretch of revelation rather than a thing the series spelled out from the beginning. So I'd ask you to hold it the way I'm holding it, as a powerful reading, maybe the most damning one available, but a reading, resting on a late line, and not a fact that was established and re-established across 10 years of episodes. The case is strong, it is not airtight. An honest narrator says both. And while I'm drawing the honest borders, one more. There's more of her story out past the original series, in the later specials, in distant lands, and people will rightly point to all of it when they argue about who she finally became. But the full moral weight of her post-series actions falls outside the original run, and so I think outside the honest scope of what you and I can fairly argue tonight. I'm not going to reach for evidence past the edge of the show I set out to talk about. The argument I made inside the borders I drew. What she becomes beyond them is a different night's conversation. So here's the defense, standing right next to the prosecution, neither one winning, both of them true. She was almost always right. When the flu came through the kingdom, she had the cure. When the Fire Kingdom was dying, people who owed her nothing, she helped anyway. When the catastrophe came over the hills, and in this world it always came, she was the one who met it, again and again. And the citizens who loved her because in the day-to-day, loving her had kept them alive. She protected a fragile, broken, post-apocalyptic world that would have eaten gentler rulers whole. And she grew. She pulled the plug in the shed when no one made her. She set down the war when she didn't have to. By the end, she could let other people exist beside her without needing to hold their strings. A tyrant who teaches herself, in private, over centuries to loosen her own grip. Is not nothing. She might be the best argument the dream of a benevolent ruler has ever had. Which is exactly why I can't let either side win. And why I want to hand the whole thing to you instead of closing it. Because here, finally, is the question, the real one, the one I asked you in the dark at the very beginning and have been circling ever since. If a ruler this good still got it this wrong, what does that say about the dream of a benevolent dictator at all? That's the thing I genuinely cannot answer for you. Is the lesson the old one, that power corrupts, that even she couldn't hold that much and stay clean? Or is it something quieter and more frightening, that it was never about corruption, that she was never corrupted, that even love, real love, the genuine article given that much unchecked power over other lives, quietly does the damage all on its own? Not malice, not greed, just love mistaking control for care because it was handed more control than any love should ever have to carry. I don't know. I've turned it over 100 nights and I still don't know, and I've stopped trusting anyone who says it quickly. So I'm not going to tell you the answer because I don't think there is one to tell, and because the show, in the end, declined to tell me, and I've come to trust that silence. I think she's morally wrong in the way powerful, loving people are wrong by mistaking control for care, and I think her whole long arc is the slow, incomplete learning of the difference. Never quite finished, never quite failed. That's my reading. Hold it loosely. Carry the question, not my answer. Was she wrong because she was a dictator, or wrong because even the kindest hand should never have been trusted with that much? And is there finally any difference between the two? Let it sit there, unsolved, while you drift. And let me take you back one last time to where we started, to that hidden shed and its wall of glowing screens, so we can close the loop properly and let the lights go down. And that is where I want to leave us tonight, back in front of those quiet, darkened screens, with the question still warm in our hands. Let me take you all the way back to where we started, before any of the evidence, before the labs, and the elections and the founding. Back to the very first thing I showed you. A hidden shed, a wall of monitors glowing in the dark. Princess Bubblegum watching her candy citizens live their small, ordinary lives, none of them knowing they were being seen. And somewhere out in the kingdom, Cinnamon Bun reaching up and quietly, almost casually pulling a tiny camera out of his own face. We opened on that image on purpose. I wanted it to be the first thing in your mind, and I want it to be close to the last, because everything we did tonight was really just a long, slow attempt to understand that one quiet picture. The ruler everyone trusts, watching everyone from inside their own faces. And isn't it strange, now that we've been all the way down and back, how differently that image lands the second time? The first time I showed it to you hours ago, it was just a little unsettling, a slightly creepy detail. A princess with cameras. Now you know what's underneath it. Or at least you know one reading of what's underneath it, and the same picture has gone heavy. The shed isn't quirky anymore. The glow of those monitors isn't cozy, and Cinnamon Bun pulling that camera out of his own face, gently, like it was nothing, like it was always there, feels less like a gag and more like the whole thesis in a single shot. That's the thing about a question like this. You can't unask it. Once you've turned the lights on in that shed, you can't walk back out and see it the soft way you did before. And I think that's true of her. And I think it might be true of a lot of things we love. And the question I asked you to carry out of that shed all those minutes ago was never really, is she watching them? Of course she's watching them. The camera is right there. The question was always the harder one, underneath. When someone is brilliant and loving and almost always right and doing all of it to keep the people she loves safe, does that make her hold over their lives easier to forgive? Or does it make it more dangerous? Put plainly, the way I promised you I'd put it, is she still morally wrong if she's a genuinely good ruler? And does her being so good at it make the whole thing better or worse? I'm not going to hand you a verdict on that. I want to be honest that this is a choice and not me running out of road. I could pretend to close the case. I could stand up at the end of the night and announce with a clean voice that she's guilty, or that she's forgiven, and some part of you would feel that little click of relief, the comfort of a thing being decided so you can finally put it down and sleep. But I think handing you a verdict tonight would be a small betrayal of everything we actually looked at. Because the whole point, the thing the show keeps doing, is refusing to let it be clean. So I'm going to do the harder and gentler thing, and leave the question open in your hands instead of closing my fists around it. That's not me dodging. That's the gift. The ambiguity is the most honest thing I have to give you, and I'd rather give you that than a tidy answer you'd stop believing by morning. But before I let it go quiet, I owe you one last bit of honesty about how we got here, because a case is only worth as much as the way it was built. So let me be plain about my own method, the way I've tried to be all night. Every single thing I said tonight that judged her, every accusation, every reframe, every moment my voice went hard, that was interpretation. One reading, the strongest version of the case I could build, offered to you the way you turn an idea over with a friend at 2 in the morning, and never once a fact about the world. When I said the surveillance looked like a creator checking her instruments, that was me reading the gap, not the show telling you so. When I said the founding might be the original wrong, I marked it as my reading, and I'll mark it again now. None of the judgment was gospel. All of it was an offer. And I want you to know the defense was real too. I didn't build her a flimsy little straw man just to knock him down and feel clever. The kindest version of Princess Bubblegum is genuinely strong, and I tried to let it stand at full height. She does cure the plagues. She does see the dangers her people can't. She does, again and again, carry the unbearable weight of keeping a fragile, post-apocalyptic, monster-haunted kingdom alive. And she does it mostly alone, and she does it mostly right. The case for her isn't a courtesy I extended. It's a thing I actually believe has teeth. And if you walked away tonight more convinced by her defense than by my prosecution, then honestly, good. That means the fight was fair. That means I didn't rig it. I'd rather you leave persuaded by the strongest version of her than by the cheapest version of my argument. And the facts, the actual facts, the ones underneath all that interpretation, I kept those to canon. The monitors and the camera in Cinnamon Bun happened. The shape of her across the whole series, the creator who became a ruler, the woman who spent years with her hand on the controls, and then, by the very end, by the finale, chose cooperation over control, set down some of that grip, and let the world be a little less hers. That shape is real and it's on the screen. I built the reading on top of those things. I tried very hard never to invent a stone and then stand on it. So when you weigh all this tomorrow, weigh it knowing the bricks were canon and the building was mine, and that you're free to tear the building down and keep the bricks. So here's the thing I'll actually leave in the dark with you. The quietest and, to me, the most unsettling reading of the whole night. The most disturbing thing about Princess Bubblegum, read this way, isn't that she's a villain. We settled that hours ago. She isn't. Not the mustache twirling kind. Not even close. What this suggests, the thing that genuinely keeps me up, is something much stranger. It's that she's so easy to forgive. That's the trap. She's brilliant and warm and usually right and clearly trying. And every one of them makes you want to wave the rest away. And I think the show is quietly asking whether that reflex, the speed with which we forgive her, the relief of saying she meant well so it's fine, is the exact reflex a benevolent dictatorship runs on. A cruel ruler you resist, a kind one you excuse. And the excusing feels like generosity, like grace, like the decent thing to do. But read this way, it might be the very mechanism that lets the gentle hand stay on the controls forever, unquestioned. Because questioning someone so good of heart feels almost rude. That's what I can't shake. Not that she's hard to forgive, that she's so easy too, and that the ease might be the whole danger. And notice it works on us, not just on the candy people. They were built to never question her. We weren't, and we still don't, not really, not for long. We watch her do the watching, the deciding, the quiet overruling, and some warm voice in us keeps saying, but she's good, but she means it, but look at everything she's right about. Read this way, that voice is doing exactly the job the kingdom was designed to do. We forgive her from the outside the same way they obey her from the inside. And both of us, for our own gentle reasons, end up leaving her hand right where it is, on the controls. Unbothered. I don't say that to make you feel caught. I say it because if forgiving her too fast really is the mechanism, then the only way to even see it is to slow the forgiving down. Just long enough to ask whether it was earned or just felt nice. That's all I'm asking. Not that you stop forgiving her, just that you notice how badly you want to. So I'm going to put it down now, in your hands, with the palm open. You decide. Is being right enough? If a ruler loves you and protects you and is wiser than you and is almost never wrong, does that earn her the right to choose for you, quietly, without asking, for your own good, for the rest of your life? I have my lean, you've heard it all night, but my lean isn't the point and it was never supposed to be. Your answer is? So take the question to sleep with you. Let it sit there in the warm, dark, unhurried. The way the best questions do, the ones that don't want to be solved tonight so much as kept. And speaking of sleep, just a soft word before the quiet, because somewhere in the middle of all this, you might already be most of the way under. And that's exactly as it should be. You don't have to finish the thought tonight. You don't have to land it, or resolve it, or wake up with an answer. The whole reason we sit with sad cartoons at this strange hour, slowly taking them more seriously than anyone needs to, is so the day can finally loosen its grip and let you go. So let your shoulders drop. Let the screen blur. If the question's still hovering, let it hover. It'll keep till morning. And so will she, watching her quiet kingdom in the glow of those monitors, the way she always has. There's no homework here, only rest and a story to drift out on, and the small good feeling of having thought about something gentle and strange together in the dark. Because that's all this ever was. Two people awake later than they should be, turning over a kindly, terrifying, candy-colored question about whether love that controls is still love, or whether being good enough at protecting people can quietly become the thing you most have to watch for. I don't get to answer it for you, I just got to hand it to you, and sit with you while you held it. And that was the whole point of the night, so I'll go quiet now, and let the question be the last thing in the dark with you. Is being right enough? Hold it gently, don't answer yet, and let that warm, unresolved thing carry us, soft and slow, into one last reflection before we let the night close over. So picture it one more time, and then I'll let it go dark. The shed. The wall of monitors, only now the screens have gone black. Every little window into someone's private life switched off by the very hand that opened it. And Cinnamon Bun, somewhere out under the candy sky, with a small empty place on his face where a camera used to be. That is where we started, and that is where I want to leave you because the picture has finished changing. And now, with the screens dead and the camera gone, it has quietly become something else. The image of a conscience. A woman alone in a dark room, deciding, with no one to applaud her, that this was too much. And so I ask it one last time, in its sharpest form. Is she still morally wrong if she is genuinely, deeply good? And did being so good at it make it better? Or make it worse? I am keeping my promise not to bring down a gavel, because the honest thing is that both readings are still standing, neither one stepping back. To build a people who could never say no to you, and then call their loyalty love, is, read this way, the original wrong, and a kind hand on the controls is still a hand on the controls. And yet she was almost always right. She carried a fragile, broken world on her back for centuries. And at the very end, she chose to stand beside the people she might have commanded and let the outcome be uncertain. And that took something most rulers never find. The dark screens hold both of those at once. Read one way, they are her conscience switching itself on. Read another, they are proof that the only thing that could ever stop her was her own mercy, which is a frightening thing to build a kingdom on. But the most unsettling thing about her, the thing I will actually hand to you, is how easy she is to forgive. And how the forgiving feels like kindness, right up until you notice it might be the exact reflex a gentle kind of control was always counting on. So slow it down. Not to stop loving her, just long enough to ask whether it was earned or whether it only felt nice. Thank you for staying up with me, genuinely, for taking a candy-colored cartoon this seriously, in the dark, at this hour, the way the people I like best always do. It means more than I can say that you spend your quiet time here. If these slow late-night turns help you drift off, let a soft subscribe come along with you into sleep. So the next one finds you. Now let your eyes close. Let the question stay unanswered. Hold it loosely the way you hold the best ones, and let it be the last thing in the dark with you. is being right enough. Good night.